5 words. That's all it took. 5 words whispered by a 6-year-old girl that stopped a billionaire dead in his tracks and exposed a betrayal worth £3 billion. But here's the part that will break your heart. That little girl wasn't supposed to be there. She was invisible. The daughter of a cleaning lady, sitting quietly in a corner, trying not to be seen. And those 2 men in their expensive suits? They never even looked at her. They thought no one was watching. They were wrong. This is the true story of how the smallest voice in the room became the loudest. How one child's honesty saved thousands of families from losing everything. And how 5 simple words changed not just a company, but one man who'd forgotten what it meant to be human. Stay with me, because what happens next will remind you why speaking up, even when you're terrified, even when you're small, even when nobody thinks you matter, is the bravest thing anyone can do. This is Lily's story, and it starts in the most unlikely place. Welcome to the story room. While you are here, please hit the subscribe button and comment your view on the story and where you're watching from. Section 1. The Invisible Girl, 1,000 Words. Let me tell you something that will touch your heart. This is a story about a little girl who changed the world with just 5 words. 5 simple words that stopped a powerful man in his tracks and saved thousands of families from disaster. But here's what makes this story so beautiful and so heartbreaking at the same time. That little girl? She wasn't supposed to be there. She was invisible. Just another face in the crowd that nobody bothered to look at. The daughter of someone society barely notices. Her name was Lily. She was 6 years old, with big brown eyes and a shy smile. Her mother, Rose, worked as a housekeeper in one of the tallest buildings in London. You know those glass towers that shine in the sunlight, the ones that make you crane your neck just to see the top? That's where Rose cleaned toilets and scrubbed floors every night while the rest of the world slept. Rose was a single mom. Life had thrown her some hard punches, but she never gave up. She worked 3 different jobs just to keep a roof over their heads and food on the table. Money was always tight. Some weeks, Rose had to choose between paying the electricity bill or buying Lily new shoes. But she never let Lily see her cry. She never let her daughter feel the weight of their struggles. Rose taught Lily something simple but powerful. Always tell the truth, no matter what. Even when it's hard. Even when you're scared. Even when it feels like nobody's listening. The truth matters, sweetheart. Always remember that. On this particular Tuesday afternoon, everything changed. Lily's babysitter called in sick at the last minute. Rose panicked. She couldn't afford to miss work, not even one shift. Bills were piling up. So she did the only thing she could do. She brought Lily to work with her. She begged her supervisor, promised that Lily would be quiet as a mouse, wouldn't cause any trouble. The supervisor sighed and agreed, but only because Rose was such a good worker. So Rose found a little chair in a quiet hallway on the 23rd floor and sat Lily down. Lily wore her favorite blue dress, the one with tiny flowers on it. Her legs dangled from the chair because she was too small for her feet to touch the ground. She promised her mom she'd be good, that she'd sit still and not make a sound. Being invisible is hard when you're 6 years old and everything feels like an adventure, but Lily tried her best. She watched people rush past in their expensive suits, talking on their phones about important things she didn't understand. She counted the lights on the ceiling to pass the time. She imagined she was a princess in a tower made of glass and clouds. Then something happened that would change everything. 2 men came rushing down the hallway. They weren't walking like normal people. They were moving fast, looking over their shoulders like they were running from something. Both wore fancy suits, but something about them made Lily's tummy feel funny. Not good funny. Scared funny. One man was very tall with a red face, constantly wiping sweat from his forehead, even though the hallway was cool. The other was shorter, holding a blue folder tight against his chest like it was a treasure. Lily held her breath and stayed perfectly still. In her 6 years of life, she'd learned that adults don't really see children, especially children like her. Children of cleaners and housekeepers. Children who don't belong in fancy buildings. The men stopped just a few feet away from her, so close she could hear them breathing hard. "Hurry up," the tall one whispered, his voice shaking. He'll be here any minute. I know, the shorter one replied, opening the blue folder with trembling fingers. Lily watched as he pulled out a stack of papers and shoved them into his jacket pocket. Then he took out completely different papers from another pocket and put them inside the folder instead. They worked quickly, like they'd practiced this many times before. Done, the tall one said. He'll never know what hit him. They rushed past Lily, without even a glance.
To them, she didn't exist.
She was just part of the furniture, invisible like her mom always was. But Lily's heart was pounding so hard, she thought it might jump out of her chest. She didn't understand exactly what she'd just seen. She was only 6, but she knew in her bones that something bad had just happened. Something wrong. Her mom's words echoed in her head. The truth matters, sweetheart. Always. Lily stared at the empty hallway where the men had disappeared. She felt scared and confused and small. But somewhere deep inside her little heart, she knew she'd just witnessed something terrible. Something that someone needed to know about. And that someone was about to walk out of the elevator at the end of the hall. The elevator made a soft dinging sound, and the doors slid open. The man who stepped out looked like someone from a movie. Tall, with silver hair and a suit that probably cost more than Rose earned in 6 months. His name was Thomas Whitfield, and he owned the entire building. Actually, he owned much more than that. He owned one of the biggest real estate companies in all of Europe. Thomas walked with the confidence of someone who'd never been told no in his life. His eyes were glued to his phone, his fingers moving across the screen as he read something important. He would have walked right past Lily without noticing her at all. But then he heard it. A small sound. A child trying very hard not to cry. Thomas stopped walking. He looked up from his phone and saw her. This tiny girl in a blue flowered dress, her brown eyes wide with fear, her little hands gripping the edge of her chair so tight her knuckles were white. Something about her face made him pause. Thomas had built his fortune by reading people, by knowing when something wasn't quite right. And this child's face was screaming that something was very, very wrong. He slipped his phone into his pocket and walked over slowly, careful not to frighten her more. Then he did something he almost never did. He crouched down so they were at the same eye level. "Hello there," he said gently. "Are you all right?" Lily looked at him, and for a long moment, she couldn't speak. This man seemed so important, so powerful. What if she got in trouble? What if nobody believed her? What if they blamed her mom, and her mom lost her job? But then she heard her mother's voice in her head, clear as day. "Tell the truth, sweetheart. Always tell the truth." Lily took a shaky breath. In a voice barely louder than a whisper, she said the 5 words that would change everything. "They switched the papers, mister." Thomas froze. Time seemed to stop. "What did you say?" "The 2 men," Lily continued, her voice trembling but growing stronger. "They took papers out of the blue folder and put different ones in. They said you'd never know." Thomas felt his blood run cold. He knew exactly which folder she meant. That blue folder contained contracts he was supposed to sign in less than an hour. Contracts for the biggest property deal of his entire career. A deal worth £3 billion that would affect thousands of families across the country. He lowered himself to one knee, looking directly into Lily's frightened eyes. "Sweetheart, this is very important. Can you tell me exactly what you saw?" And Lily did. She told him everything. The tall, sweaty man and the shorter one. How they'd looked scared and guilty. How they'd switched the papers so quickly, thinking nobody was watching. But someone had been watching. A little girl in a flowered dress who understood that wrong was wrong, even when she didn't understand all the grown-up details. Thomas placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You did exactly the right thing telling me. You're not in trouble. In fact, you just helped me more than you can possibly understand." He paused. "What's your name?" "Lily." "Lily, I need you to stay with me for a little while. I need to find your mom and make sure you're safe."
"Can you do that?"
Lily nodded, still scared but feeling a tiny bit braver. Thomas held out his hand, not demanding she take it, just offering. After a moment, Lily placed her small hand in his large one. As they walked toward his office, Thomas pressed a button on his phone. "Security to my office immediately," he said, his voice cold and sharp. "And find Rose Harper. Tell her daughter is with me and she's safe." When they reached his office, Lily's eyes went wide with wonder. She'd never seen anything so grand. Windows that showed the whole city, furniture that looked like it belonged in a palace, paintings on the walls that were bigger than her entire bedroom. Within minutes, the office filled with people. Serious men in security uniforms, lawyers with laptops and worried faces. And then Rose burst through the door, her face pale with terror. "Lily," she cried, rushing to her daughter. "Baby, are you okay? What happened?" Lily jumped into her mother's arms. Rose held her tight, looking at Thomas with confusion and fear in her eyes. "Mr. Whitfield, I'm so sorry if she bothered you. I told her to sit quietly." Thomas held up his hand, stopping her. "Your daughter did nothing wrong. In fact, she may have just saved this entire company. She may have just saved thousands of people's jobs." Rose stared at him, not understanding. "She witnessed a crime," Thomas explained. "Two of my employees tampering with contracts. Documents I was about to sign. If she hadn't told me..." He looked at Lily, still clinging to her mother. "If she hadn't been brave enough to speak up, the damage would have been catastrophic." And in that moment, everything began to change. Thomas called his head of security over. "Pull the surveillance footage from the 23rd floor hallway. Last 30 minutes. They played the video on a large screen, and everyone watched in silence. There they were, just as Lily had described. Two men in expensive suits, looking guilty and scared, switching papers in the blue folder when they thought nobody was watching. But someone had been watching. A 6-year-old girl who knew the difference between right and wrong. "Those are senior executives," the security chief said quietly. "James Peterson and David Brooks. They've been with the company for 5 years." "Not anymore," Thomas said, his voice like ice. "Have them arrested. Call the police. This is corporate fraud, and I want them prosecuted fully." As security rushed out to find the men, Thomas turned back to Rose and Lily. Rose was trembling, completely overwhelmed. She'd spent years being invisible, just another worker nobody noticed. And now the owner of the company was looking at her like she mattered, like her daughter mattered. "Miss Harper," Thomas said, his voice softer now. "I owe you and your daughter more than just thanks." Lily showed extraordinary courage today. She spoke up when it would have been so much easier to stay quiet. That's rare, even in adults. Rose hugged Lily tighter, tears streaming down her face. "I just taught her to tell the truth, sir. That's all." "That's everything," Thomas replied. He looked at Lily, who was peeking at him from her mother's shoulder. "Lily, do you understand what you did today?" Lily shook her head. "You saved thousands of people's jobs. Families who won't have to worry about paying their bills now. Children who won't have to go hungry. All because you were honest and brave." For the first time, Lily smiled. A small, shy smile that lit up her entire face. And in that moment, Thomas Whitfield felt something crack open inside his chest. Something that had been locked away for years behind meetings and money and power. He felt human again, connected to something real. That night, Thomas couldn't sleep. He sat in his penthouse apartment, looking out at the city lights below. Usually, this view made him feel powerful, like a king looking down at his kingdom. But tonight, it just made him feel small. He kept thinking about Lily, about her frightened face and trembling voice, about how she'd been brave enough to speak up when two grown men with years of experience had been cowards, sneaking around and betraying everything they'd been trusted with. But more than that, he thought about how close he'd come to walking right past her. How many times had he walked through that building without seeing the people who kept it running? The cleaners, the security guards, the maintenance workers. They were invisible to him, just part of the background. Rose Harper had worked in his building for 8 years. 8 years. And until today, he'd never known her name. That realization hit him like a punch to the stomach. He'd built his entire empire on being observant, on noticing details others missed. But somehow, he'd stopped seeing people. He'd stopped seeing anything except deals and properties and the next big win. A 6-year-old girl had shown him what he'd become, and he didn't like it. The next morning, Thomas did something he'd never done before. He called an emergency meeting with his entire leadership team, 20 people who helped run different parts of his company. They gathered in the conference room, confused about why they'd been summoned so early. Thomas stood at the head of the table, his hands clasped behind his back. "Yesterday," he began, "this company almost collapsed. A £3 billion deal almost fell apart because 2 employees decided to commit fraud." The room went silent. Everyone shifted uncomfortably. "But we didn't collapse," Thomas continued. "We were saved by someone nobody in this room has ever met. Someone who makes minimum wage cleaning our offices. Or rather, her 6-year-old daughter." He told them the story. Every detail. The switched papers, Lily's quiet observation, her courage to speak up. Some people looked skeptical. How could a child understand corporate documents? But Thomas had the security footage, the evidence, the confession from the 2 men who'd already been arrested. "Here's what haunts me," Thomas said, his voice dropping lower. "That little girl noticed something wrong because she was paying attention. Meanwhile, we walk through this building every single day and see nothing. We don't see the people who keep these lights on, who keep these floors clean, who make sure we can do our jobs." The room was completely silent. "That ends today," Thomas declared. "I want a full review of how we treat every employee in this company. I want to know if people feel valued, if they feel safe speaking up, if they believe their voices matter. Because if a 6-year-old can save this company while we're too busy to notice, we're doing something fundamentally wrong." One executive raised a hand carefully. "What do you want us to do about the Harper woman and her daughter?" Thomas had been waiting for this question. "Rose Harper gets a new position. Full-time, better hours, triple her current salary. Her daughter gets enrolled in our educational program. Full coverage through university if she wants it." Another executive spoke up. "That's generous, but is it wise to set that precedent?" Thomas looked at him coldly. "People might expect to be treated with dignity."
Good.
They should. The changes at Whitfield Properties started small, but they grew quickly, like ripples spreading across a pond. Thomas began doing something he'd never done before. He walked through the building. Not rushing to meetings or staring at his phone, but actually walking.
Stopping.
Talking to people. Learning their names. Asking about their lives. Actually listening to the answers. He met George, the 65-year-old security guard who'd worked night shifts for 15 years and never once complained. He met Sarah, who managed the mailroom and knew every employee's birthday by heart. He met Ahmed, the maintenance supervisor who quietly fixed problems before anyone else even noticed they existed. These people had been invisible to him. Now he saw them clearly. And he was ashamed it had taken so long. Word spread through the company like wildfire. "Did you hear? The owner's talking to everyone. Learning names. Actually caring. Something's changing. Something big." The leadership team, following Thomas's example, began implementing real changes. Better wages across the board, especially for support staff. Anonymous feedback systems where people could voice concerns without fear. A genuine open-door policy that meant something more than empty words. Some of the old executives resisted. "We're coddling people," one complained. "This isn't how business works." Thomas's response was swift. "If you can't treat human beings with basic dignity, there are plenty of other companies that will appreciate your approach. This one isn't for you anymore." 3 executives resigned within the month. Thomas didn't try to stop them. He was rebuilding something. Not just a company, but a culture. And it started with remembering that every person who walked through those doors carried a life, a family, a story worth respecting. Meanwhile, Rose and Lily were adjusting to their new reality. Rose still couldn't believe it was real. She'd moved from night shifts to day shifts, working regular hours in a newly created role coordinating all the building services. The pay was more than she'd ever dreamed of earning. For the first time in Lily's life, Rose didn't have to choose between paying rent and buying food. She could do both. She could even save money. The constant fear that one unexpected bill would destroy everything began to fade away. She could breathe. Lily, for her part, handled the changes with the beautiful adaptability of childhood. She'd started in an after-school program the company provided, where she could do homework and play in a safe place until her mom finished work. She made friends with other employees' children. She brought joy to a building that had forgotten what joy looked like. But the biggest change was in how people looked at her. They didn't look through her anymore. They saw her. They smiled. They waved. Security guards high-fived her when she walked past. Executives stopped to say hello. She'd become a symbol, proof that doing the right thing mattered. One afternoon, about 2 months after everything happened, Thomas invited Lily to his office again. This had become a weekly ritual. She'd visit, they'd talk, and somehow these conversations with a 6-year-old gave him more clarity than most business meetings ever had. Lily bounced into his office wearing a yellow dress, her hair in pigtails, carrying a drawing she'd made at school. "Hello, Mr. Thomas," she called out cheerfully. She'd started calling him that after he told her Mr. Whitfield felt too formal for friends. "Hello, Lily," Thomas said, genuine warmth in his voice. "What did you bring me today?" "A picture," Lily said proudly, holding up the drawing. It showed a tall building with stick figures holding hands around it. "That's you." She pointed to the tallest figure. "And that's me and Mummy. And those are all the people who work here. We're all holding hands because we're friends now." Thomas felt his throat tighten with emotion. He took the picture carefully. "This is beautiful, Lily. Can I keep it?"
Yes.
"I made it for you." He pinned it to the wall behind his desk, right where he could see it every day.
There.
"Now I'll never forget." "Forget what?" Lily asked, tilting her head. "What really matters," Thomas said softly. "You know, Lily, I've been thinking a lot about what you did. About how brave you were." Lily shrugged. "I just told the truth. Mummy says that's what you're supposed to do." "Your mummy is very wise," Thomas said. "But telling the truth when you're scared? That's not just normal. That's courage. That's heroism." "What's heroism?" Lily asked. "It's when you do the right thing even when it's hard. Even when you're afraid. Even when it would be easier to stay quiet." He looked at her seriously. "Lily, I need you to promise me something." "Okay. Promise me you'll always stay exactly who you are right now. Someone who tells the truth even when it's scary. Someone who speaks up when something's wrong. The world needs more people like you. Don't let anyone convince you to be less honest, less brave." Lily thought about this very carefully, her little face serious. Then she held out her pinky finger. "I promise." They pinky swore on it, and Thomas felt something settle in his chest. A sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. He'd made billions of pounds, closed countless deals, built an empire. But helping this little girl understand her worth? That felt more important than all of it. 6 months passed. London winter gave way to spring, and the city bloomed with new life. But the biggest transformation wasn't in the trees or the weather. It was in the glass tower where everything had changed. The culture shift that had started with Lily's 5 brave words had taken deep root. Employee satisfaction was at an all-time high. People worked harder, not because they were forced to, but because they wanted to. Because they felt valued. Because they felt seen. The building felt different now. Warmer. More human. People smiled at each other in lifts. They held doors. They remembered each other's names. They acted like a community instead of strangers competing for the same resources. Thomas walked through his company now and saw it with completely new eyes. He'd thought he was building something impressive before, a monument to success, a symbol of power. But he'd actually been building something hollow. Beautiful on the outside, empty on the inside. Now he was building something real. News outlets ran stories about the transformation at Whitfield Properties. Business schools wanted to study what Thomas had done. Other companies tried to copy it, though most missed the point. You couldn't fake genuine respect for people. You either believed people mattered or you didn't. Thomas believed it now. Lily had taught him to believe it. On a bright Saturday morning in May, Thomas did something unprecedented. He threw a company-wide celebration. Not for investors or clients, but for employees and their families. He rented out an entire park, brought in food trucks and games, hired musicians and face painters. 3,000 employees and their families showed up, transforming the green space into a sea of laughter and joy. Thomas spent the day walking around, meeting people's children, learning their stories. He saw George teaching his grandson to kick a football. He watched Sarah dancing with her husband, celebrating their anniversary. He listened to Ahmed talk proudly about his daughter, who'd just been accepted to medical school. These were his people, not his employees. His people. And he'd almost lost all of them because he'd been too blind to see two criminals switching papers right under his nose. But then he spotted Lily. She was on the swings, her yellow dress flying behind her as she soared higher and higher, her laughter ringing out like music. Rose sat on a bench nearby, watching her daughter with a peaceful smile Thomas had never seen before. He walked over and sat beside Rose. "She's happy," he observed. "She is," Rose agreed. "We both are. Mr. Whitfield, I still can't believe everything you've done for us." "Please call me Thomas," he said. "And you don't need to thank me. I should be thanking you. Your daughter saved me." Rose looked at him thoughtfully. "She told me something yesterday. She said you used to look sad, but now you look happy. Is that true?" Thomas watched Lily on the swings, her joy so pure and uncomplicated. "Yeah," he said quietly. "It's true. I was sad for a long time without even realizing it. I thought success would fill the emptiness inside me, but it just made it bigger. Your daughter showed me what actually matters. People. Connection. Truth. The simple things I'd forgotten about while chasing complicated things." Rose reached over and squeezed his hand briefly. "Thank you for listening to her. Not everyone would have." "I almost didn't," Thomas admitted. "I almost walked right past her that day. Sometimes I have nightmares about what would have happened if I had."
But you didn't, Rose said firmly.
"You stopped. You listened. You believed her. That's what matters." Lily jumped off the swing mid-flight, soaring through the air for one perfect moment before landing in the grass with a giggle. She spotted Thomas and came running over, her face flushed with happiness. "Mr. Thomas, this is the best day ever," she announced, plopping down on the grass in front of them. "It is pretty wonderful," Thomas agreed. Lily looked around at all the happy families, all the children playing, all the parents laughing together. "Everyone's so happy here." "They are," Thomas said. "And you know what? They're happy because of you." Lily tilted her head, confused.
"How?"
"When you told the truth that day, you didn't just save the company. You reminded everyone here, including me, what really matters. You taught us to pay attention, to care about each other, to speak up when something's wrong. All of this," he gestured around the park, "started with your courage." Lily thought about this, then smiled her brightest smile. "I'm glad I told you." "So am I," Thomas said. "More than you'll ever know." As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Thomas stood at the edge of the celebration and watched. Families laughing, friends playing, colleagues who'd become something more than just coworkers. This was wealth. This was success. This was what the view from the top was supposed to look like. He thought about the version of himself from 6 months ago. The man who'd been so focused on deals and money that he'd forgotten to see the people making it all possible. That man would have hated this party, would have seen it as wasteful and inefficient. That man had been a fool. Lily appeared beside him, slipping her small hand into his large one. She didn't say anything, just stood there, holding his hand, watching the sunset. "Lily," Thomas said softly, "can I tell you something?" "Uh-huh." "You changed my life. You saved more than just my company. You saved me." Lily looked up at him with those clear, honest brown eyes. "You're not sad anymore." "No," Thomas said, and realized it was completely true. "I'm not sad anymore." "Good," Lily said matter-of-factly. Then she hugged his leg because that was as high as she could reach, and ran off to play again. Thomas watched her go. This little girl in a yellow dress who'd had the courage to speak truth to power, who'd trusted him enough to tell him something frightening, who'd reminded him how to be human again. The business world would remember this story as the time major corporate fraud was prevented by an unlikely witness. The headlines would focus on the arrests, the near disaster, the billions saved. But Thomas would remember it differently. He'd remember the moment he stopped being a billionaire first and became a human being again. He'd remember learning to see the people who'd been invisible. He'd remember understanding, finally, that real leadership wasn't about being the smartest or the richest or the most powerful. Real leadership was about listening to a 6-year-old girl when she whispered that something was wrong, and believing her enough to act. As night fell and families began heading home, Thomas felt something he hadn't felt in decades. Deep, lasting contentment. Not the temporary high of closing a deal, but the profound satisfaction of knowing he was finally living right. Seeing clearly. Building something that actually mattered. All because one little girl refused to stay silent. All because she chose courage over comfort. All because she believed the truth was worth speaking, even when she was scared. Lily had saved everyone that day. But in saving everyone, she'd also saved one lost soul who'd forgotten how to see. And that, my friends, made all the difference. Sometimes the smallest voice in the room becomes the loudest. Sometimes the most invisible person has the most important thing to say. And sometimes it takes a child to remind us what it means to be truly human. Never underestimate the power of telling the truth. Never underestimate the courage of speaking up. And never, ever walk past someone without seeing them. Because you never know when the person everyone else overlooks might just change your entire world.
The end.